Well, hi there folks. Bit of an update on my Atom RC Swordfish. If you saw part one, you saw I actually bought the basic kit, which meant I had to supply my own motors and electrics. Not too difficult a job putting it together. That's on my channel. Then part two, I had a rather hairy, scary maiden and my first experience with a V-tail. And in fact I totally screwed up the rudder mix. Since those test flights I saw a lot of advice online saying you don't need a V-tail mix in with the ailerons. Ailerons on their own are just fine. Anyway, moving on, this is actually finished and ready for a second test flight. First off, I'll show you the installation of the SpeedyBee flight controller. I was hoping I'd be able to fit it in here, which was intended for the video transmitter. That was impossible. That was partly because, like a fool, instead of buying a SpeedyBee F405 wing mini, I bought the standard size, which is a little bit bigger, but I managed to get it in. Let's flip it over and I'll show you that installation. In fact, I'll take this off first because I don't want to damage it, but I'll come to that later. Of course, the other thing you may well notice here is this is an Atom RC Swordfish with an undercarriage, but I'll come to that later as well. Anyway, let's take this bottom bit out. I can show you my installation. SpeedyBee F405 wing went in quite okay. It mounts upside down and facing the wrong way, and I ended up spending a few hours in INAB getting the configuration right, organised in such a way that when you move it the control surfaces move the right way. A bit of a pain in the butt, to be honest, but pretty happy I've got there in the end. It is important when you build these kind of things to actually test that the stabilised modes work in the way they should. In other words, once you've got it fired up and it's armed, move it and make sure, for example, if you're dropping that wing, that aileron actually is compensating by going down, because as I discovered in my early tests with SpeedyBee and flight stabilisation, particularly that first flight with the Bixler, actually, rudder was moving the wrong way. So every time it, anyway, won't go on about it, but make sure control surfaces are moving the right way. So pretty standard installation there. In fact, if you buy the ready to fly version, that is exactly where they mount it, and it's upside down. Anyway, let's flip it over again. So the undercarriage. First question I suppose is, why did you want to fit an undercarriage? Reason I wanted to actually fit an undercarriage was this has come out about a kilo with a 2200 milliamp 3S LiPo in the nose. There are some little finger grips there to launch it with, but not a great fan of throwing models, so I'd much prefer to take off from the ground. This is the kit I bought, £6.50, which is amazing. That includes the wheels and included a tail wheel. I'd already worked out before I ordered it, I'd measured that it was the right size to go across there, because fortunately dimensions are shown on the website, which is unusual. Fortunately, perfect size to go on there. As you can see, I've got a couple of barbecue sticks through and rubber bands so that potentially it can collapse if it needs to, rather than damage the plane. Did have about a few problems with this. It's clear to me, first off, it was nosing over as I tried to test it, opening the throttles on the ground. So you do need a forward angle. Might need a little bit more, but I've adjusted it by putting some little shims under. So quite pleased with that. Of course this does actually have a nose wheel, but because I've used some old drone motors and not high kV motors, I've had to put some 3-bladed props on, and really the undercarriage is there as much for trying to save my props when it lands, because there's no way landing that with the 3-bladed props and just a nose wheel that they're going to survive. So hopefully that'll save my props. I was pretty pleased with the installation of this tail wheel. That required a fair old bit of thought. As you can see in the picture, you get this kind of spring-loaded thing that the wheel mounts on with a stopper there. Didn't come with a spring. It does have this mount anyway. So I figured best way to do it was cut off the long piece of the spring on this, hot glued a piece of wood in there, so I've got something to screw to, put another stopper on the end of that, made a little hole so that it actually goes into the foam, and as you can see I've actually found a spring there to hold it so that it's facing the right way, because in my early tests on the carpet didn't seem to want to go straight, so I think straight tail wheel will help it track on the ground. If it comes to it, I might have to put differential thrust in, because as I say, I can't get a rudder mix to work for when it's on the ground for taking off. So another joy of buying a model with a V-tail, my first ever V-tail, and to be honest, it's going to be my last. But anyway, so I think I've covered everything underneath here. So on the top, in the orifice that's intended for VTX, is my FlySky IA6V 6-channel receiver. Underneath that little cover, that is intended for the GPS, under that little cover is my GPS. And as far as the TX goes, and of course this is an analog one, Walksnail or something, who knows, one day I might be able to afford Walksnail and go digital, but for the moment it's analog. And I thought long and hard about how to mount it. This is supplied, ventilated, so what I did was made a hole through it. There is a hole there for an antenna, made a hole through there so that it's at an angle, and then it will actually go in without fouling my receiver there. Goes in at an angle, a couple of O-rings on it, holds it quite nice and steady, and it's ventilated, which is, it's even got a little ventilation scoop there. And what I've done with my connection so that I can remove things easily, I've got some of these 4-way JST type connectors, so I can easily unplug this, plug it in there, and another benefit of that really is once you've turned it on and it's on the ground, so that this isn't just getting hotter and hotter and maybe do it some damage, I can actually wait until I've got my 6 satellites and it's ready to arm. Then I can plug in this and it tucks in quite nicely like that. Screw there. So pretty pleased with that. Although on the subject of video, I saw a couple of people flying Swordfish the other day, and in fact they were flying FPV. It's a pretty quick plane, and I think it's going to be a long time before I do actually fly FPV with it, and I guarantee I will have a spotter. As far as sorting the centre of gravity goes, there is plenty of room up front here. Quite a few people I've seen online are running 4-cell lithium-ion batteries, and I've seen one guy that actually had a 1-hour flight with one of these. But I'm using 2200 milliamp LiPo 3S. That tucks nicely in here. Had to extend that hole a little bit, but the good news is with that on there and this little lightweight keychain camera which plugs in to the SpeedyBee with this lead, with that on the nose, it balances absolutely perfectly with the LiPo just there. I've also got a Firefly Q6, which is a good 1080 or 4K, it might even do 4K with camera with EIS that'll mount, and also that'll plug into my SpeedyBee, which means I get a good on-screen display with all the information about altitude, distance from home, and so on and so on. So all in all, pretty pleased with the installation. It has been a bit of a pain. Biggest pain really, to be honest, was trying to sort out the mix on a V-tail. But anyway, and maybe at some point I will figure how to steer it on the ground with the V-tail, but I'll come to that later. First job I've got to do is actually make sure this is flying properly, and I've got the SpeedyBee F405 properly set up. First thing I'm going to test is return to home and loiter. I've only got 6 channels, so I can't have masses of modes. There are no end of modes. One mode that I am thinking about trying to fit, and I couldn't manage to get it work on the Bixler, is auto launch, because that means if I do have to throw it, it will fly itself away, power up and do what it has to do. So anyway, that's something else for the future. I think stick to the basics first. But that's all. Hope you found this interesting. Like I say, build kit for the basic was in there. It's a great looking plane, and all the other reviewers on YouTube have actually raved about it, although they have also said it took a fair bit of tweaking to get it to fly nicely. So I've got that joy to come. Anyway, I think I've said all I want to say. If you want to see how I get on with the second test flight of this, why not hit the old subscribe button? And let's face it can't be any worse than that first flight. If you found this interesting at all, please give it a like, and why not check out some of the other stuff on my channel. Loads of different build blogs, lots of little gliders. I've built about 20 of those, little glider cheapy conversions. But I'm sure there's probably something there to keep you amused on a rainy day, and just looking up at my window, it's raining again. So I don't think there's going to be much from me for the next few days. But I'll stop waffling. I will leave you with the basic build blog of this and the quite spicy maiden I had. But thanks for watching, and hopefully I will catch you all later. Bye for now.